Hopefully you had a look at the weather and noted that at about exactly the time we're going to walk out of here, whatever deluge we're expecting today will begin. So hope you brought your umbrella, or if not, you got about 30 minutes to get out before it starts, supposedly. Okay. We will, hopefully today is going to be a really good day. We're going to cover 3 or 4 really meaty portions. So this should be maybe informationally a little bit dense, but also explanatorily should be really helpful, I'm hoping. So I know there are going to be at least 2 types of people in the class. Some who are like, this is a discussion, I want to have more discussion, I like this discussion. And we'll call that group A. Group B are, could someone just please tell me what the minimal facts approach is, outline it, detail it, and give me the arguments for it, and stop talking about all the stuff around the outside. So for the group B, I'm going to say something that should make you happy, and then for group A, what I'm going to say is, and then we're going to say group B satisfied, and we're going to keep moving on group A stuff. So by show of hands, a little bit of honesty test, I'm going to ask you 2 regular questions, and then my third question is going to be a trick question, or an ambush question. So is it really an ambush if I'm telling you that it's an ambush ahead of time?
Yeah.
Right, okay. So it seems like it's fair. How many people have read the book, or a significant portion of the book so far? Okay. How many people really want me to just give you, just give me the arguments, lay it out concisely and in a short format so that I can understand it? Okay, who knows where to find that? Who knows where we can find those arguments made succinctly in a short, organized format?
In the book.
Where? There's an appendix in the book that those of you who've wanted me to go over this for the last 2 weeks, if you read the book, you found it. The appendix is a detailed outline of the arguments. So the notes the handouts that people wanted me to put out, it's in the book. Trick question for you. So in here are all of these very important, succinct points. And so for those of you who really wanted that, thankfully thank you Lycona and Habermas, they did this for us. And you can see them outlined in a relatively brief format. It's not single card kind of length, but it breaks it down. And then the explanations of those, of course, can be found in the prior text. But for those of you that wanted to look for that, this is where that's located. So if there are notes, one of the reasons I don't feel that I want to do handouts for the class is the handouts you're looking for is the appendix of this book. Okay. I also said, so we had 2 conflicting ideas that I left us with last time. One was a gentleman had brought up a point that I said we we're going to bring up next time. He's not going to be here this time, so we'll let him address it first time next time. So we'll push that off. But I would like to start with the kind of assignment that I asked folks to look at. And if anybody wants to share theirs, great. And we'll use it as an example. If nobody wishes to do so, great. We can cover it generally speaking, kind of generically. But one of the questions I wanted to talk about was, I asked you to, if you're willing, to look at 3 to 5 beliefs that you have in your life, things that you think are true, that to you are essential to how you live your life. That is to say that if you changed one of those 5 beliefs, it would significantly change how you lived your life. Does anybody want to share 1, 2, or 3? Oh, good. Bravery and volunteerism.
I have one, the importance of family.
Okay. Importance of family. And what do you mean exactly by that?
Taking care of elderly parents, taking care of your children, being available for
Okay.
them.
And what do you mean by importance?
That they are more important than other things, some other things in my life, and that they take priority over other things.
Why are you granting them that priority or importance? Why are they more important?
Partially, I think, because I was raised that way.
Okay.
Partially because I honestly love them and I feel that they are important in my life and have been during not only my formative years but my later years. So,
important for what? So you might say it's important in war to have a strategy. Why? Because if you don't have a strategy, you'll lose the war. Or it's important in a car to have gasoline. Why? If you don't have gasoline, the car won't run. What is it? Why are these family relationships important in your life?
Because they give me, to a certain extent, I feel like I gain significance
Okay.
from the relationship being important. I feel like They give me comfort when I'm going through something.
Okay.
I feel like it's a reciprocal arrangement.
Okay. Significance. And why do you care about being significant?
That's a good question. I'm not sure.
Okay. Why does anybody care about being significant?
Scott, you're way zoomed out, so it's not terribly
clear. All right, let me try it again. Thank you. My 4-year-old daughter, we have a video of her hugging the the cat that lives next door that has now decided that lives outside our house. And she's crooning over this cat, and she says, "You are the best kitty ever, 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 ever. You're so important." And we were like, "What? What are you talking about? Where did she get that?" But what do we mean? I think she means the same thing that you mean there, like significance. But what does it mean to be significant?
To be important.
Yeah, right, okay. What does significance mean? Signify. What does it mean to signify something? So,
is it to be noticed?
okay, but you can be noticed for good reasons. Doesn't everybody have the dream where you show up to school with no clothes on? Right? You're noticed then, probably not good. So why do we want to be noticed? Why do we want to be significant? Why do we want to matter?
Well, it gives you a purpose.
Yes, but what if your purpose is? Have you seen the demotivational purpose posters? It may be that the purpose of your life is to serve as a warning to others. Yeah, right. So maybe we want a particular kind of purpose.
That's my favorite.
Yeah, it's a good one.
That if you weren't around, things would be worse.
Yeah, right. That somehow you are contributing to the good, and in the case of importance of family, to the good of your family. And I think you started to hit on it, which is we don't like to say this because it sounds selfish. But one of the reasons we want to be loved by our family, we want our family to think that we're important or significant or that we're contributing or whatever, is because we want our family to love us and we want to love our family. So ultimately, I think at the end of the day, we really are seeking love. And I don't mean that in some hippie-ish way, but Madalyn Murray O'Hair, the famous atheist lady that was kind of, in some ways, the impetus or the lady responsible for schools back in the day were Pledge of Allegiance and sometimes prayers at the beginning of school. She was led part of the effort to get religion, God, out of the schools kind of thing. In her notebook that, that was found later kind of thing, one of the things in her journal she had written, something like, "Please, please, why can't somebody just love me?" So somebody who may not have identified, God as this loving being, still is seeking and wanting love in their life. So it's not love is not a religious desire only. It is a native desire to our own being, whether it comes from a religious reason or even if you don't think that it does, it's there. Okay, what are other things that people have in their life, other than importance of family, that was essential?
I don't know how this fits in there, but the usefulness and applicability of the golden rule.
Okay.
Is, I find that gives guidance every day.
And in case anybody thinks, so these are related, right? Obviously, because the golden rule is do to others as you would have them do to you, or another way of stating it is love others like you want to be loved. Lest you think that this is just obvious. There are many societies, and especially historically, that are not founded on that principle. Might makes right. The Spartans were not terribly concerned with love, at least in the way that they organized their society. There were a lot of people who thought like that what you have a right to that which you can take. Or we see it in movies. It says a king controls only, a king is a king only over that which he controls by force. That kind of idea.
And also in our own society, the people their rule is do to others before they do to you.
Right, yeah. This is not a universally accepted principle even in our own society. Yeah. But I mean to say there are other places and societies and empires and world powers that lived on a completely different theory. And at the end of the day, the historical evidence suggests that neither made for a long-lasting society, nor did it make for the happiness of the people in the society, and certainly made for the misery of the people who were the victims of those societies too. All right, what else? What other, Steve, you had your hand up?
But there's a reason for every circumstance that leads to that, you know, that is either good or bad.
Okay.
That there's a rationale that's leading towards something that's better in the long run.
So this is the things that happen for a reason?
Yeah. And that something good can happen even out of hard things.
So it's not just that things happen for a reason. When we say that, what we mean is that somehow there's a benevolent drive in all of this. So things happen for a reason, and that reason is the extinction of the species. You know, is that what we mean? Or things happen for a reason, and the reason is we're all going to be miserable someday. What we tend to say is things happen for a reason, and good will come of this. That's the unstated portion.
Romans 8, what is it? Romans 8,
all things work together for good for those that love God and those who are called according to His purpose. Right. But if you don't, even on a non-biblical version of this one is hey, destiny has chosen us to do X, Y, and Z for the good of mankind, or the Buddhistic kind of belief systems that will say all this is experience tending towards unity in the long run, that kind of thing. Okay. Anything else?
Said democracy, recognizing that takes different forms, is superior to other forms of government, and that democratic norms are worth promoting and defending here and abroad.
Okay. And we can cheat it a little bit by making Winston Churchill's version on this one, which is democracy is the best form of government except for all the is the worst form of government except for all the others. Right. So, but ultimately, yeah, democracy is the best as in terms of a form of government. All right. And one more.
I already went on, but
Yeah.
consequences. And that's kind of related to other things, but every actions, words, the way you think, all have consequences that need to be considered.
Okay.
Read what you saw.
Okay. Well, let me ask for then. This is a good one. Give me something way more practical on the day-to-day living side. That could be diet, career, something like that.
So I was just thinking, separate that money has value, and there's a systematic way by which we do that. This
Okay.
is not related to his thing, but if it doesn't, and there's a systematic system, if not, that radically changes how I live.
You mean if money doesn't have value?
Basically, that money has a value that's agreed upon, and that we have a system by which we can transfer funds and kind of do things. If not, then there's lots of questions about what am I doing with anything for work, for where I live, how do I agree upon anything.
Okay.
So I don't know how to summarize that up at a higher level, but that's what I was thinking.
Okay. That's a little more theoretical than I wanted, but it's a good one. All right, so anything else that's a little more practical and simple?
Decisions determine destination.
Yes, but I mean talking like practical, like I think that you should eat cereal for breakfast. I'm talking that level of practicality.
Avoid seed oils.
Okay. Thank you. That was surgically precise. Okay. Yeah, right.
Now they're just done all day.
All right, so let's look at this list right here. Now, why am I bringing this up? Everybody tell me why we're bringing this up. What has been the point that we've been making from the get-go?
Can I add one more?
You can, but I'm going to ignore it. Okay.
No, I think the room is rather biased because we're pretty much we all have at least Christian attitudes towards life, and nobody in here would say something like, "He who has the most toys wins."
I agree that we're biased, but that's fine. In fact, the fact that we're biased is part of my point.
Okay.
Okay, so why are we bringing this up?
I was thinking that it's because we live by things that are important that we do not realize. And
If we're going to
what's the most important?
If we're going to turn around and say something like this, even for the most important things in my life, I have some number of important things in my life. We've listed 5 that I'd say broadly were probably shared, minus the seed oil one, by many or most people in the room. The question is, what are the reasons that we believe those to be the case? Whatever the reasons are we believe those to be the case, we need to recognize something about those reasons. We consider those reasons sufficient, not just to believe something, but to believe something on which we are basing our whole lives. I said, give me 5 things that would change your life if you didn't believe it. And you listed off fairly good, like, yeah, I mean, if it's not the case that, so these right here are, how do we relate to people? These 2, how do we relate to people? These right here are, how do we relate to the universe? I guess this is also people, right? This is lots of people. This is fewer people. Money has value. This relates to our career. So, I mean, we covered family plus friends. And then this is plus the world of people. And this is career. So these are very important. And this is, personal health. Okay, so we covered the gamut with these 5. What were the data that you used to support this? Okay, we can look at the seed oil one as an example and say, well, I read a study that said this was bad for you, and I read it in a health magazine. All right, do you know the people at the health magazine? No, I don't know any of them. Are they liars? Are they telling the truth? Are they bought by an industry? I don't know. I don't have any idea. All right, what about the authors of the study? Never heard of them. Couldn't tell you who they are. That kind of thing. And the reason I bring that up is, and I'm not criticizing Seth, like all of us do that all the time. We don't look into the primary sources. We don't look into the reasons that things are said to be true. We don't look into the studies. We don't look into the research. We don't look into the character of the people that had it. We don't even look into who's paying for it, whether this journal is considered legitimate by whom? By everybody? Has everybody checked into it this much? Money has value. That's a good one right there. I guess, this can be terrifying. If someone was like, what's money made out of? Paper. What can we do with the paper? You can light it on fire. That's about it. And you stitch enough of it together, you can make some clothes that'll last for a little while. What is it? Its intrinsic value doesn't seem to be much. With no problem, it's backed by gold. Not anymore, right? And gold anyway is worth a while. Is it? Gold's fairly common, actually, when you consider it. Why is gold worth that much? And ultimately, at the end of the day, somebody, if we had a mental reset of the entire society, it's not unreasonable for society to conclude that these instruments that we're using to exchange goods and services are not useful anymore. And in fact, we think that it's biasing society one side or another, so we're going to stop doing it and we're straight back to bartering. In which case, all the farmers have a lot to both give, but also a lot to defend. So society could break down instantly if something like that were questioned significantly. And so I bring these up simply to say, if it's the case that we believe things for not good reasons, it's either the case that we need to judge all the other things for those same reasons, that is to say we need to be fair how we weigh things, or it's the case that we need to come up with a new way of discovering truth so that we can be sure of what it is that we believe. Now let's talk about one of the things that I'm fairly sure we are sure about, the importance of family. Why are we so sure about the importance of family? So that we didn't get those from studies. Where did we get that? Experience. Yeah, what kind of experience though?
Good or bad?
Good and bad, right? We have been treated poorly in a family, and it made us feel badly. We have been treated well in a family, and it made us feel good. We have treated other people poorly, and we saw what resulted from it. So experience has taught us some of that, and that's a good reason to believe that. But not all knowledge can be gained by experience. Right? Historical knowledge isn't gained by experience. It's gained by an historical method. Scientific knowledge is gained by a particular kind of experience, but we often don't have the resources and time to do the experiments ourselves, so we do have to figure out whose word we're going to take on it, that kind of thing. So I'm not saying doubt everything, but I'm saying that if you're not going to doubt everything, you don't have a right to doubt religious truths, or you don't have a right to doubt scientific truths. or you don't have a right to doubt relational truths, especially in any special way. You have to be fair across the board. Okay, so thank you for doing that experiment. Now let's talk. I wanted to address one thing when we talked about probability stuff, and then we'll go back into the actual minimal facts approach, and then we'll turn back to discussion eventually. A good point was raised last time of like, okay, let's talk about the minimal facts. Or here they are. What if we're 95% certain of this one, and 90% certain of that one, and 90% certain of this one? This one's 50-50, this one's 75. Okay, and then what do you do with the probabilities? You multiply them together, and the resultant probability is 17% or whatever it is, right?
I said 50, but it's actually 41%.
Okay, 41%.
It is correct that you do that.
Okay, now I'm not, first off, like I know this is going to make him uncomfortable, but I'm going to do it anyway in terms of affirmation. Can we have an actual legitimate round of applause for the one guy who's willing to stand up against 40 people in the same room? Because that takes a significant amount of like courage. Like you're walking into quote unquote enemy. Hopefully Christians are not enemies, right? But you're still walking into enemy territory, putting down a flag and being like, okay, I'll take all comers. I'll take all of you at once. That's pretty brave. So we appreciate that. That being said, let me attack and here we go. There's a problem with this kind of reasoning. Let's consider, I'll give you two cases in court. If this reasoning was valid, if this is how probability works, then you would never want to put more than one witness on the stand. Why? Well, this witness we put on there, we're 95% sure he's telling the truth. You know what? I got 17 more witnesses. Great, we'll put them on the stand. But we're 95% sure of each one of them. What happens when you multiply all those probabilities together? More witnesses means you become less certain. Now, surely there's something wrong with that approach. Now, there's a nuance in there. If they were all just eyewitnesses saying, I saw this guy shoot that guy, then that's a little bit different because these are separate. They're all attesting to the same fact. Okay, so that's a little bit different. But these are different facts right here. So let's put that also into a legal context. Let's say that we'll do a parallel one over here. And the question was, I forget who our victim are. Seth, aren't you always the aggressor? We're going to make, I guess that's our potential murderer. Yeah. All right, so Steve's our victim again. Poor Steve is dead with a bullet in his heart. And what we say is, the first point is the gun was Seth's. The second one is Seth was spotted by video entering and exiting the area around where Steve was killed at the time. The third one was a witness said they saw Seth and Steve arguing. Okay, and let's say the fourth one was another witness says Seth claimed he shot someone. All right, these are independent, these are different facts. They all have to do with the same set of occurrences, let's say, or the same idea, but they're different independent facts with different people. One's video. Two of them are witnesses. One of them is a material kind of forensic. So if the fact that, let's say the gun was Seth's, let's say that we're 95% certain of that one because of the records on it. Someone saw Seth on video. Oh, we're, deep fake, but we'll call this, we're 99%, certain. Witness saw Seth. Oh, well, okay, witnesses, they can be biased, so we're 80% certain of that one, and we're 75% certain of this one. The fact that we added a 75% certainty onto this does not mean that by the time we get there, that reduces the probability by a quarter. Right? Sorry, go ahead.
I think you're getting this kind of all wrong because what the percentage, of our original 5, what the percentage of 41% is that one of those 5 things is 41% likely to be untrue.
Okay.
It doesn't say that the entire
argument.
Argument is untrue, right?
Yeah, I'm only at this point arguing against the idea that says if you multiply these together, that it reduces the certainty. Because that's not how you combine the probabilities of independent events. It's how you combine the probabilities of dependent events.
It indicates the likelihood that at least one of those things is untrue. And then you can multiply again to determine how how likely is it that 2 of them are untrue, or how likely is it that 3 of them are untrue?
Now hold on, let's back up. I'm not sure I'm following you on that one. Can you explain what you mean exactly?
So there's a 41% chance, if we go with 90%.
Yeah.
If we go with my original 90% for each of those, there's
Yes.
41% chance that at least one of those 5 things is true. You get that by multiplication, not by addition.
Why do you think that's the case?
That's how probability works. It's 0.9 times 0.9 times 0.9 times 0.9. And then
Yeah, what I'm saying is that's not how probability works. If what you said is true,
that is a law of statistics. So I mean that is how it works.
He's claiming at least one of them would be false.
Yeah, one of the statements would be false.
So
There's
if
a
you had a
41% chance that one of the statements is false, but each of them has a 90% probability.
so let's take this as an example, the murder of poor Steve here by Seth.
Then you multiply 0.95 times
Yep.
0.99 times 0.8 times 0.75,
Yes.
and that would give you the probability that everything is true. And you subtract that from 1 to get the probability that one of those statements is false.
So if if what you just said is true, then the best thing that we could do as investigators is to turn around and say, I'm going to collect only the following evidence, and I'm not going to include any of this. Because now
it is a legal strategy to,
now I'm
to
95%
keep out some
certain.
of your least likely evidence, and also when you're presenting a case, to present only the strongest and most critical points. Because it is true that every time you add details, there's greater likelihood that one of those details will be incorrect. I mean, just if you consider, if I have 2 statements, I say Jimmy works at Burger King.
Yep.
Maybe I've got a 50% chance that that's correct.
Well, for the
If
sake
I say
of,
Jimmy works at Burger King,
hold on,
Sally works
let me
at,
ask you, let's stick to this instead of picking another example. Let's use this example right here. Using this example is what you're saying that, okay, 95% chance the gun belonged to Seth. The fact that a witness saw Seth and Steve argue reduces the chance that the gun was Seth's.
No, that's not correct.
Okay.
It reduces the chance that one of those facts is incorrect. It doesn't.
All right, hold on.
Use the
Let me
example-
step through it one at a time. So we're only going to consider 2 facts right now: that the gun was Seth's, and that the witness saw Seth and Steve argue. Okay, we're going to consider these 2 probabilities.
Right.
The fact that we introduced the second probability reduces which of them being possibly true.
We don't know which one.
Okay.
It doesn't affect an individual question. So if you flip 2 coins, right?
Yep.
There's a 50% chance that you'll get a heads for each one.
Yep.
The first one getting heads doesn't affect the probability of the second one.
Right.
But you still only have the 25% probability of them both being heads when you look at it before you flip them. Right?
Yeah.
So it has a impact on the overall probability of all of them being heads. But it doesn't affect because they're independent from
Yes.
each other. It doesn't affect the next flip.
Right, because they're independent events. And that's what I'm
Right.
saying is the fact that
But it does reduce the probability of getting 2 heads is half of the probability of getting 1 head.
But those are not independent events. That's the main point.
They are
So
independent
now, the
events.
ones that you are trying to describe, that you are describing, when you throw 2 coins, they have specific outcomes. There is something called sample space, which is all the possibilities that are possible, right? All the outcomes that are possible. And you only use the counting rule of probability when you have multiple independent events. What he is describing is only one single event that is attested by many different sources. If you apply this rule, as many events you add, the probability will always decrease. And this is the point. You are right in your statistic, but you're confusing how to define, how to design this experiment. Design of the experiment is different than what is presented and what you're considering.
Yeah, that's correct. So the difference here is if you were going to have two events, you're going to flip the coin twice. You're going to get heads or tails, right? So the probability that you get 2 heads, 1 head, 1 tail, another head, another tail, 2 tails. 25%, 50%, 25%, if you didn't care the order in which you did the tails. So that's to turn around and say something like this. Randomly, what's the probability that Seth was a shooter, that Seth was on video, That's a witness saw these guys argue, etc. But that's not the question we're asking, because we're asking a question about whether a particular event happened. Okay, so you're talking about what the naive probabilities are based on possibilities. Right here, we're talking about, given the evidence that we have, how do we combine those probabilities? So the thinking that you're talking about doing of like, hey, look, at the end of the day, the fact that we got two heads in a row, there was only a 25% chance of that. The fact that you flip the coin again doesn't change the probability of whether the first event was 50-50, nor the fact that the second event was 50-50.
Right.
So the independent, but that's what I'm saying is if you have,
But I'm not saying that.
what you said, what I'm trying to argue against is what I thought I heard you say initially, which is when you combine all of these events, it increases the probability that at least one of those events was false.
Yeah, I'm telling you, it tells you what the probability is that one of them is false. Whether it, so if you go back to the original one, I think we said 50-50 for the tomb.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, 41% is the total, so yeah, even that one would be less probable. But yeah, it indicates the probability that one of your assumptions is false.
So I'm having difficulty understanding why you think that's the case.
Okay, Scott. That's what I was working for just a second. I think what it is that if you make 10 truth claims, the chances that one of those truth claims is false is higher than if you make one truth claim.
Yes.
You see what I'm saying? Like the more you say, if one of them could be wrong. I mean, that's the point of the problem.
If they're independent. These are not independent in the end result that they're talking about.
Right, because in the case of something that's building on top of each other, if you have 100 witnesses that all say the same thing, you have more evidence than if you have 10 witnesses that say the same thing.
Yeah, I guess let me ask it this way. Let's consider a coin flip. We'll use that one as an example. And by the way, thank you all for sticking with this one, but this is very important. This is very important. In fact, whether people, this gentleman right here is not alone in his thinking. This is normally how people object to this one. So if you want to know what it looks like, we have in this particular class a rare and good thing, which is we can interact with somebody who's holding the opposite position, not from he's having to do it from I'm pretending to be doing this perspective. This is genuine belief here. So this is, I think, worth the time and investment. Let's say that we flipped the coin here 2 times. Okay, same experiment we did, and we got 2 heads in a row. What's the probability? What would we say? What's the probability that it's true that we got 2 heads in a row? We'd say 25%. Okay. What about if we flipped the coin 2 times in a row, and you said, hey, it was heads twice, and he said, hey, it was heads twice?
I'm sorry, I'm not following.
You say we have 2 witnesses.
Mm-hmm.
This event occurred.
Right.
Okay, so it's 25% chance that happened, and that's the prior probability. So absent anything else, the naive estimate is there are...
After it occurs, it's 100%.
Sure, but we're talking about, we don't know whether it occurred or not, right? So Seth and I are talking about this, and we're like, hey, I heard there was a coin flip in there. What was it? Did they get 2 heads? And I'm saying they got 2 heads in a row. And Seth says, there's only a 25% chance they got 2 heads in a row, man. I'm like, I know. But this guy right here said he saw them and there were 2 heads. Does that increase or decrease the probability?
Is it probability or confidence?
Probability. In this case, the probability that the event that we're talking about actually were 2 heads in a row.
Well, that's confidence of the person's belief that it happened.
But we're talking about something probabilistically in that we're assessing what's the probability that Jesus rose from the dead. Because that's a question that we're trying to answer. Right? That's the specific question we're trying to answer. There is another question of how much confidence should we have in it, but let's call that a separate one. Now the question is, what's the probability that Jesus rose from the dead, given we have these facts that are roughly agreed upon?
But you can have Jesus have risen from the dead and not have any of these facts. I mean, it still could be
Right.
the case if it happened. Or you can have these things happen and it doesn't have anything to do with Jesus.
Okay, let's take exactly what you just said there.
What
you just said there. I think what you're saying is correct. You could have all of these facts. That Jesus could have risen from the dead, and you don't have any of these facts. Right. We could have flipped this coin 2 times, and we don't have any of the witness testimony about it. Okay? In which case, what should we judge the probability to be that there were 2 coins flipped if we have no other information other than 2 coins were flipped on this particular date at this particular time? what should Seth and I assess as the probability that there were two heads?
25%.
Okay, now, instead, we have more evidence. We have somebody said there were two heads. Now we had somebody said, I saw that there were two heads. Now what's the probability there were two heads?
Greater, depending upon that person's credibility.
Okay, so let's say that we are 90% confident that you're telling me the truth about it. What's the resultant probability that there were two heads?
You would multiply 0.9 times 0.25. So in that case, you would increase the probability of them being, one of the two being incorrect, because, well, you increase the probability of the 0.25 and you decrease the probability of the 0.9.
So why do you think that's,
Overall.
why do you think that's the case? Because I will tell you that's not how we typically conceive of statistics. That's not how it works at CERN. That's not how it works in science. That's not what we do. What do we assess as the probability?
It's the 5 sigma.
But what are the sigma there?
I mean, it increases the probability that you had two heads because you're having someone tell you that, but it's still, so in that case it works to increase that probability.
But we're talking about how specifically.
What do you mean?
So how much specifically does it increase?
I don't
the
know. I
probability?
have to do the calculation.
So, but I'm giving it's a fairly straightforward one, right? We got 90% chance that the witness is telling the truth. We got 25% likely event. What's the resultant probability that it was actually a 25% event?
22%.
The original 25% doesn't matter. It's a question of the other situation entirely.
All right, let me give you an analogy as to why that's true, but let's pause because he's doing math and it's not there. When I'm doing math, the world stops existing and turning as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, 0.225.
Okay, so decrease the probability?
It's the chance that both of them would be correct.
Right, so consider what happens if we thought this way. This would destroy science, right? What it means is, if we have scientists that tell us the experiment ended up this way, it's less probable that that happened. So that can't be the way that we reason. Now, I know that people say this all the time, and we, by the way, it's not just him doing this, we all do this all the time. But this is why Hume was wrong. This is why we're justified in believing that somebody won the lottery. What's the prior probability that Dan won the lottery? It's 1 in a billion or whatever the number is, right? But the fact that 5 different people on the verification committee said, we're going to give Dan $300 million or whatever else, they do that. We don't turn around and say, okay, well, we got to multiply the 95% chance that each one of those guys is telling the truth times the 1 in a billion chance that that Dan's the guy that picked the right numbers to win the lottery. That's not how probability works, because what we're testing is not the combination of those two probabilities. That's the important thing. The right way to think about this, and the Bayesian way to think about this, and this is why science is heading towards Bayesian reasoning, either completely or almost completely, is you have to ask this question. What's the chances that Dan had the winning ticket, given the evidence that we have? What's the chances that this event actually occurred, given that we have 2 eyewitnesses that are reliable that said they did it? You don't combine it with the original probability. So it doesn't matter in some improbable the original event is. It matters for your confidence, but it matters your assessment of the probability of those 2 people telling the truth. So the notion that is intuitive, the intuitive notion is that this is how you combine the probabilities. But you couldn't do science if that was the case. And you wouldn't gather evidence in court. You would gather one piece of evidence you think you're most confident in, and then don't let any of the rest of it go. Yes, sir, and then you obviously next one.
I'm going to challenge the percentages with the witnesses. Say Seth, neighbor who can't stand Seth.
Yeah.
He's a bit biased.
Yes.
Stranger saw him on the street, neutral, apathetic, doesn't know. Say his own money wasn't dearly, but I know my son's guilty. He should go to jail. Very, very significant. Same thing with the minimum tracks. All are attested to by Jewish or Roman authorities who have every reason to want it to be false.
All right, so look, here are 4 witnesses of Seth that said Seth did the shooting, okay? These 2 right here, here we go, we'll do it this way. These 2 love Seth. They think Seth is the best. And this guy hates Seth. And this guy is about as independent as you can get. Okay? So if the only witness that we had was somebody that hates Seth, we might conclude, well, that's not good evidence that Seth killed somebody. Why? Because he's got a motive to say that I want Seth in trouble. What's another way of saying that? What is the probability that this guy's telling the truth, given that he hates Seth? This is where we're assessing a prior probability there, given the evidence. Now, what you might say is something like this. The probability that Seth was the shooter, given that two people that love him said they saw him, it's like now let's call it something like north of 95%. And then here's an independent witness that said it, but we don't know that the independent witness has any reason to believe or not believe that Seth is guilty. So if we only give that 90 and we give these 95, 2 by 95, so to speak, the fact that this guy said Seth was the shooter doesn't decrease the probability that Seth was the shooter, right? We've still got this right here. We've still got this right here. So my point is this. Our confidence, our belief that Seth was the shooter should increase the more witnesses we have to the fact. Why? It actually has to do with why are witnesses unreliable? Why are witnesses unreliable? Prejudice or bias. So, but let's say we got rid of them with that one. So now we've got two people who are biased, if anything, in Seth's favor. Why might they have made a mistake? Yeah, right. So there's some probability in there that their memory was just incorrect. There's some probability they went in there and they had just seen a movie where a guy named Seth shot somebody, and they saw something very close to that happen, and they kind of stuck them together or something like that. So that's correct. This is the stuff that you're actually trying to exclude are when we say something is 95% probable that these guys saw Seth do the shooting, it means that in the 5% of other things in there are hallucination, by one of them, or are just like weird angle of light, was weird or something like that. The hallucination thing, how do you decrease the probability that he had a hallucination? Another friend who is not that guy, the second friend, decreases the probability that there's a hallucination. Unless both of them were on acid at the time, in which case they could both be hallucinating the same thing, right? So you have to consider all these prior probabilities. But the point is that combining these probabilities increases the chances, not decreases the chances, that the event itself actually occurred. Yes, sir, and then second. And then our killer.
How about speaking to the math, okay?
Yep.
When we say that the event is 95, let's use 90 for easy numbers.
Yeah.
Okay. When we say it's 90% possibility, we're saying that it's a 10% impossible, not possible. If we take those 10...
let me back up before you go any further. We're not saying possible. We're saying probable.
Okay, probable.
Yeah.
I'm just doing math here, so if I use bad English, please forgive me.
No problem.
But math-wise, if we take those improbabilities, the 10%, the 10%, the 10%, and we multiply them together the way he does, that improbability becomes really, really tiny.
Yeah, that's right.
So it becomes 1%.
That's a good point, that if you tried to do it in terms of improbabilities, you would reduce it as well. So this is why...
If I had 10 witnesses with 90% probability on all those witnesses, and I took the inverse of all of those, the 10% of improbability, and I multiply them all together, I come up with a 99% probability. I'm just rounding the number, roughing the numbers here, but I hope you get the image.
Seth.
That's what I said. By all the
hold on a second.
No, I didn't multiply the 90s. I multiplied the 10s.
What he's saying is if you use the same process, but you used them against the... if you ask the question this way, what's the chance that Jesus wasn't crucified? 5% chance. What's the chance that the disciples didn't believe they saw him raised from the dead? 10% chance. When you multiply those probabilities together, you come up with less than 1%. So then you would say, well, there's a less than 1% chance that Jesus didn't rise from the dead.
That all of these witnesses are wrong.
Right, and so the probabilities don't work that way.
We're not looking for the probability of one witness being wrong. We're looking for the probability of all the witnesses being wrong.
we're looking for the probability that one of those is wrong.
No,
I'm not
that's
saying, I'm not
either
saying.
they're all right or they're all wrong. If
Before
they
you
all
have
are
the
testifying to the same event, then they're either all correct or they're all
Right, if they're all
wrong.
saying the same thing.
So
If those
evaluating the possibility of one being
Well, let's let him talk.
wrong
Let's
and
let
nine
him.
being correct.
Hang on a second. Hang on a
is
second.
illogical.
Hey, hang on 1 second. Let's hang on. We gotta let each other talk. So say your point again.
They're all saying the same thing, so
Yeah.
yes, that's correct. But these are different facts.
So this is now here's why what he's saying.
I'm testing to the same
Let
event.
me give another example.
Before we do, let's cover one step at a time, please. The event right here, this was Seth shot somebody. So all of these are attesting to the same event. So in a way, although this isn't exactly how it works, it's closer to how it works, that in a way what you're doing is saying, what's the probability that this guy would say Seth, saw correctly? What's the probability that guy saw correctly? And you're multiplying you're reducing the chances that they saw something wrong by multiplying the improbability in this case.
Right.
Okay, so ultimately the fact that you have 3 people attesting to it means it's more likely to have happened than if you only had 2 people attesting to it or had 1 person attesting to it. Do we agree on that?
Yes.
Okay, and I think that was the point. So.
I mean, the individual probabilities is only if, like, you lost your memory.
Oh, hold on. I messed something up. The other important step is this. The fact that, let's consider this guy right here, the disinterested party as far as we know. Does the fact that there are 3 witnesses increase the probability that somebody is lying versus having 1 witness? So in one case, we've just got this guy.
Now they're all saying the same thing.
Okay, and then now I think we're agreed.
Right. I think the individual probability is only if you lose your memory between hearing each one. Once you hear 2, you start thinking of what's an explanation
For why there were 2 people who said it.
in which both of these would be compatible, and then you start building what's the probability of that explanation being correct or not.
Okay. All right, good. All right, now, in the interest of everybody in here who's not deeply into probability theory, we will step past this for a second and we can pick some of this up the next time. But I wanted to make sure we had a discussion on this point because it's a very important point, and it has to do with how is it that we judge whether we think something's true or not. Yes, ma'am.
I just have a question, and please excuse my ignorance. I am horrible at math. So are we saying basically that using straight probability math can lead to misleading conclusions?
There are.
But
Can I say this in a church? There are 3 kinds of lies. Lies. Damn lies. Statistics. My wife is a professor, a PhD professor of probability, and teaches this professionally. And she is, of course, also the greatest lady ever to walk the face of the earth. The second greatest lady ever to walk the face of the earth, present company. That's my mother, in case anybody wants to know. So I'm in deep trouble anyway I addressed this one. Probably shouldn't have addressed it at all. She has a textbook, literally, that she uses for a class called How to Lie with Statistics. So yeah, it's not the case that, there are statistics, therefore we're sure about it. You got to do it right. You got to know, and by the way, statistics are a way of saying a way of being lazy, which is, hey, there are 500 people that I really ought to ask about this. I don't have the time to ask 500 people. I'm going to ask 50 people, and I'm going to assume that everybody else is going to say the same thing in the same ratios, roughly speaking. So obviously it's not laziness. It's like we can't do it all the time. But in short, I guess if I can back up and make the following point, we in modern American society like to think that this is how we reason. But I want to point out 2 things. One, it's not that clear that we're doing this rightly. And the second part that's really important is, which of you did the math on this? Did any of you do the math on this? If so, what was the number? Right? Nobody does the math on this. And my point,
math can't be applied.
Well, my point is this. Is it fair for us to say, I'm going to address these specific religious historical facts in this extraordinarily rigorous way, but I'm not going to address the other belief systems in my life this way? I would suggest to you, no, it's not fair. And we do it all the time. One of the reasons we do it is, if we were going to test everything we believed this rigorously, we'd never do anything but test our belief systems, or we'd only have 3 or 4 belief systems that we would believe in. I actually think that's fine. If I only had 10 things in my life that I really believed in firmly, that'd be fine. So I actually think that we ought to take the time to do the math. I'm a big fan of that. One of my principal objections to the way that we do religion in Christianity is that we don't do that. Because I'll tell you what I found. Now, one of the things that matters, by the way, on all of this, and one of the things that I would say to Hume in all of this, is for Hume, he said extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. Is it extraordinary, from a Bayesian perspective, if it's the case that you would say something like this? You might say something like, what's the probability that Jesus rose from the dead? Hume answers that one from a naturalistic perspective, which he says, given the laws of nature, what's the probability that Jesus was risen from the dead? What's the answer to that one? One in some incredibly tiny number, like might as well not happen. But that's not the probability calculation. The calculation is, given that God exists, what's the probability that Jesus rose from the dead? Obviously, that changes it significantly. So what's the most important question there? Right. So if you want to talk about doing a good probabilistic assessment of whether Jesus rose from the dead, the prior is so much different between there is no God and there is a God that you shouldn't even do the second calculation until you've settled the first. And my own experience is when I ran the math on for those of you that saw the debate, you've seen what my number is. That if you listen to the science, if you only went with logic and science and you threw the Bible out completely, I'm not even going to listen to that. I'm not going to listen to preachers. I'm not going to listen to priests. I'm not going to listen to the Bible. None of it. If you just took it on the science, we are like 2 to the 500th power, 10 to the second to the 500th power chances that this happened by design. That's how certain we can be that the universe was designed. And by the time you combine all the other probabilities, we were into it's nuts not to believe that God existed. Then you turn around and make the assessment of, well, did Jesus rise from the dead? Now you need to basically say, well, given these facts, at least agreed upon by a majority of scholars, what should our explanation be with the background knowledge that God exists? I will admit that if you're coming from it to a perspective where you don't say that, you don't have any reason to assess the probability as high on the prior probability of it being high. Okay. Yes, sir. Please.
I'm not really convinced about what we just discussed, but I'm willing to move past that. But I think that there are two other important points to make that are related to what you were just saying.
Yes.
And one is that, can we go back to the 5 facts?
Yes.
So we can ignore facts 2 through 5 if 1 is false.
Yes, that's right. That's right.
And you had that at 95%.
Oops, sorry.
95%.
And I made up those numbers, right?
Right.
Like those are completely pulled out of
We
thin air.
agreed on those numbers.
Yes, right.
So that means that there's a 5% chance that it's false. A 5% chance that that's false is much greater than the probability that Jesus rose from the dead. Naturalistic
yes.
point of view, right? So if you're looking at it just from the point of probability, I think your case is already lost. If you want to add in God, then like we were talking about last week with the cards, probability doesn't count if God changes what the card is when it's turning around. Right?
I agree, but let's go back to the first statement. I'll take the higher burden for you.
You can't use probabilistic thinking at all if you're starting to bring in supernatural explanations, because he can do anything, right? Well, so everything is 100% probability.
What I'm trying to say is this. Consider the follow. So the question we want to ask is this. What's the probability that Jesus was raised from the dead given the evidence that we have here? Because that's the way that the writers of the argument frame it. What's the probability that we would have the evidence that Jesus was crucified, which we have from multiple independent attestations, 7 of them that they list out. So they've got 7 independent sources, ancient sources, that say Jesus was crucified.
Yes, but those are all later sources. They weren't witnesses. They're reporting what other Christians are saying decades later.
If you read, I don't know if you've read the book.
Your own reason.
We agreed on 95% that Jesus was crucified.
Yeah, but this is a very important point.
I know, it's this point.
Okay.
Your reasoning was, what's the question to ask is, what's the probability that God is real?
Hold on, let me back up. That's not what I'm saying.
Because we can't go there until we've answered that one.
No, I'm saying let's ignore that for now. Let's ignore that for a second. Let's pretend that we're not doing that at all. Let's just look at it from an atheistic perspective, a Humean perspective, and say this. What's the question is, this is what Hume missed. Let's go back to here's the analogy. So somebody won the lottery. Okay, if you turn around and say the probability that Dan picked a series of, I don't know how many numbers in the lottery, 8 numbers, 10 numbers, how many numbers do you have to pick to get right?
6, I think.
6, you got to pick 6 numbers that nailed it. And 2-digit numbers up to 100 or single-digit numbers?
One of them is around a number at the end.
Yeah,
So
okay.
6, you got 5 plus 1.
All right, so the probability of guessing that correctly is in the billions, 1 in billions of getting it right.
You know,
right?
a gazillion is a real number.
Okay, agreed. But let's say it's in the millions, okay? So the chances that when Dan comes up and is like, yeah, I got it. If what you said was, dude, the probability that you've got the right number here is 1 in a million again, so I don't care what evidence you have. And he says, well, here's my evidence. The people on the television program, freeze-framed it, says that these are the 7 numbers or 6 numbers, and here's my ticket with the 6 numbers on it. Now what's the probability? If what you say is, there's nothing you're going to do to increase that probability, it's 1 in 500 million against you doing it. Like, I don't care that you have these things that match.
The probability is always 100% that someone's going to do it. Or
No, that's why it rolls over. No, it rolls over all the time.
Right. But it's very high that someone is eventually going to do it. And even if it rolls over 100% of the time, somebody's going to win.
Yeah, but we're asking the question, what's the probability that he got it?
It's the same probability for everyone. It's very low, but it's 100% that someone gets it. So it's not surprising
Yeah, but
that any particular person has it.
what we're trying to assess is whether or not
Pick an individual out.
that individual got it. That's the probability judgment we're trying to
After the fact, it's not that improbable if we have him holding the number.
Right. So what we say, the way that
I think that's really
the way that we
extreme
say
because
that.
all we have to look at is the difference between 5% and 0%. Because if Jesus wasn't crucified, then none of this counts, and there's a 5% chance that he wasn't crucified. There's a 0% chance he was risen from the dead, and
But why do you think there's a 0% chance that he's risen from the dead?
or 0.0000000.1.
But why do you think that?
Because that's what we experience. If there was a 1 in 20 chance, 5% chance of Jesus not being crucified is 1 in 20. If there's a 1 in 20 chance that people can rise from the dead, every 20 people that died, one of them will be resurrected. We don't experience that. We experience 0 people having been resurrected. So, and you just admitted a few minutes ago that that's a very low probability, unless you add in a supernatural element, in which case probability goes out the window, and you can't make a probabilistic argument. So I'm not saying that Jesus didn't rise from the dead or that you can't believe that, but you can't prove it this way.
Well, I guess what I'm wondering is, like, what do you think the probability is that Hannibal crossed the Alps with elephants?
I don't really know enough about that history to know.
Do you think it's
Probably
basically
pretty high, yeah,
yeah?
but not 100%.
But it only happened one time in history.
Sure.
But that was your objection to Jesus rising from the dead. Well, it only happened one time in history. So
Well, we don't know
even
that it
continue.
happened at all.
Well, we don't know that Hannibal crossed the Alps at all either.
Well, we've got a pretty good. I assume that historians have good reason for that, and there's no.
And
there's
historians
no
have good
requirement-
historians
there's
have good reason for
requirement
this
For a
too.
miracle to occur.
Ah,
that
so
could be a naturally occurring.
So do you have a
situation.
prejudice against miracles?
I don't have a prejudice against them, but they're by definition the most unlikely thing to occur, and they require a supernatural explanation.
Why do you think they're unlikely to occur? Why do you think miracles are unlikely to occur?
That's how they're defined. I mean, if miracles occurred all the
I
time,
need
nobody
to
would
look
care
up the
about them.
definition.
The definition of miracle is not an unlikely event. The definition of miracle is a supernatural intervention by God or some other supernatural being.
Right, you have to assume a supernatural explanation because they're so unlikely to occur naturalistically.
No,
Otherwise,
say that again?
if an event could occur naturalistically, it wouldn't be a miracle. It would just be an unlikely event that occurred. And unlikely events occur all the time,
Yes.
right? Because
Yes,
billions of events occur constantly. So, in order to differentiate between just a highly unlikely event
Yeah.
and a supernatural event,
Yep.
the difference is the supernatural event's impossible to occur naturalistically.
But
And
no,
you have to have a
but the
supernatural
definition of a
explanation.
supernatural event is that it's not naturalistic.
Right.
Okay, but so we can't say that makes it improbable.
What do you mean?
You can't say that it's improbable a supernatural event occurs because because it can't possibly occur naturally. That doesn't make sense.
That fits the
Yeah,
definition of supernatural.
it's unlikely to occur unless there is a supernatural entity dictating it.
Yes.
In which case, probability doesn't apply because supernatural entities can do anything
When we're determining the probability of what card flips around, we
Yep.
assume that it's not going to change supernaturally
Yep.
from the time that it's in his hand to the time he shows it to us.
Yep.
Right? That's probability only applies to naturalistic events. It cannot apply to supernatural events because we don't have any way to determine what the probability of a supernatural event is. If there's some supernatural entity that's all powerful, then the probability is 100% if he wants that thing to happen.
How do you determine the probability? We'll go back to the card game. So one case, God's just changing the cards. How do you determine the probability that when I got a royal straight flush that I cheated?
I don't know enough about cards to.
It's a highly improbable.
I don't play cards because
Yep.
I can't tell who's cheating.
Yeah.
I assume people that are really good at cards would know how to count the cards and know how many are in each.
Right.
deck
What's
and
the
so forth.
probability that I cheated? Do you think, given that the probability of pulling that hand is 1 in 500?
I don't know.
Well, you told me that you knew in the case of God doing it that there was no way to know.
Right, because that's a miracle. It's not a miracle for you to get that hand. It's just an unlikely probability, but people play cards all the time.
Well, what I mean to say is, in playing cards, God's a person in our understanding. So what we're saying is, what's the probability that a person, God, reached in and changed what that card actually was? So what's the probability that happened? That's the question we're asking. Did a miracle occur?
Right.
And the other one is, what's the probability that I cheated?
I'm saying there's no way to know what the probability of what a supernatural agent does.
Is there any way to know the probability of whether I cheated or not?
You have to look at this.
Maybe.
What would it be?
I don't know.
Okay, what I'm saying is
I don't know about
these are the same things. There's an agent causality attributed to this one. In the one case, God was the agent. In the other case, I was the agent. How do you judge the probability that either one of
But
us
you're
did?
not all powerful.
I don't need to be. The question is whether I cheated. Whether I changed the cards.
You can't just do that automatically, right? There's probability that you fail if you cheat. There's no probability that God would fail.
Right, but the question was, did I intend to? Let's say I'm a good cheater, and that every time I intend to cheat, 99% of the time
You
I
have
get
to
it.
know all kinds of things about your character. And
Right. But the bottom line is, you're saying that you couldn't possibly tell whether I'm cheating or not.
I couldn't know, that's why I don't play cards.
Okay, but if that's the case, if what you're saying is, anytime a person's involved in it, there's no way to tell?
I'm not saying anytime any person's involved with it. I think people that run casinos in Las Vegas are very good at detecting cheaters.
Okay.
I can't do that, so I don't try.
Okay.
But there are ways to do it, I presume, by
So if we leave it to the experts that are good at detecting truth, you'd be okay with that?
What's that?
If you left it to the experts that were good at detecting truth, you would be okay with that?
Yeah, I mean, that's on them.
Okay, well, the experts who are good at detecting historical truth agree on these facts.
They agree 95% that Jesus was crucified, okay? And that's still 5% that he wasn't, which is still a lot more likely than that Jesus was resurrected.
I think 95%.
Well, I don't know how you're getting from there's a 95% chance that this is true to then, well, that's obviously false.
Yeah, because there's a 5% chance that it's false, and then there's a 0% chance that the opposing thing is true.
What's the opposing thing?
That Jesus rose from the dead.
Right. The fact that you already have a prejudice against miracles is the bias.
It's not a prejudice against miracles. That's how probabilities work. And we assume that in all academic fields. If another historian was to say, they were to set out to explain how Alexander the Great took over so much territory, and he was writing up his academic journal article, and he said, well, God helped him out, the end, and turn that in. No way it's going to be published, right? That's not an answer historically. In order to answer a question historically, you provide evidence and say this is the most likely thing to have happened. And that is always naturalistic. Bringing in some kind of supernatural entity is not, it doesn't fit into the probabilistic way of thinking.
So this is the point to which Hume got, and I will now sum it up for everybody so that you can, the things that you're sensing, this is the question that you want to ask. Given this way of reasoning, how would you ever have evidence for a miracle?
You couldn't.
Aha.
In this way.
Now, here's my point. If what you're saying is there's no way to ever have evidence for a miracle that you would believe, historically, then it means that you're completely not open to the facts. If the facts are that a miracle occurred.
I'm not saying that it didn't happen. I'm not saying that Jesus wasn't raised from the dead.
Right.
I don't believe he was raised from the dead. But I'm not saying that you can't believe that. But you can't demonstrate it through historical method. Right? You can believe it for other reasons, through faith or whatever.
So fair enough, but let me ask this question. Hang on one second.
Historic history is all probably.
Let me ask this question. History is about trust. Whether you trust what the people said or wrote was true. That's what history is about. The probabilities, you can reason probabilistically that way, but generally speaking, the one thing that you're not worried about is whether the person's telling the truth or not. It's whether hallucinations, etc. Which is when we do it. I guess we'll do this at the beginning of class next time because I'm probably going to do it this time. We will look very quickly at what those arguments and evidence are that these folks are listing out. But I want to say them two things in the last 5 minutes here. One is, if you can't do it, if you can't tell whether a miracle was done in the past by historical methods, by what methods can you tell that it was done in the past?
You have to accept it on faith.
Are you telling me? Well, okay, if a supernova occurred in the past, or if Hannibal crossed the Alps, what method do you use to determine whether that's true?
Historical method.
Okay, so the difference between
probability that happened.
Okay, because what you're saying is one of them claims a miracle happened and the other one doesn't, and miracles are not allowed. You're not allowed to have witness testimony and historical methodology that attests to a miracle happening.
No, you can have that. Sure, you can have people.
But you'll never conclude that the miracle actually happened.
Right.
How's that not bias against miracles?
It's because the probability that one of those people was lying is always higher, or it's that there's some other explanation, is always higher than a miracle occurred on naturalistic reasoning.
But nobody.
And if you don't use naturalistic reasoning, then you can't use probability.
People are testing.
Why do you think if you don't use naturalistic reason, you can't use probability? The guy that literally invented probabilistic reasoning, Bayesian probabilistic reasoning, was a religious person.
People are testing to an event, not to what caused the event, but that they witnessed the event.
Right. I'm willing to give the probabilities that so and so said he saw it. Right. I didn't have the probabilities.
Yep.
The problem saying Paul believed that he had a vision.
Yes.
Right. Okay. High probability that that's true, but it's still possible that it's not true.
Yep.
And that's the problem. Is that there's always a possibility that these are not true. None of these facts are 100%. And the most important one, that Jesus was crucified, is only 95% true.
Okay.
It's probably to be true. Which is significant, but not significant enough to overcome the hurdle of something impossible happened. Right?
But you're defining as impossible,
Yes.
which is your bias.
It's not a bias. It's impossible naturalistically.
Nobody's saying it happened naturalistically. Literally, nobody's saying it happened naturalistically.
Apply statistics, and you can't do that if you.
Why can't you apply statistics? Why can't you apply
For the same
statistics?
reason of that changing that card.
But I showed you why that reasoning was fallacious.
I didn't accept whatever your reason was. If cards can turn suit as they're being turned, there's no probability anymore.
Seth, can you close the door real quick?
You can't apply probability to cards if they change suit as they're being turned.
All right, we'll pick this part up next time a little bit. Let me touch on one thing really quickly here so that we frame this also for those of us. For the folks that want to go back and look at the arguments that are in the back of the book, let me tell you what the explanation the authors were making here. This is very important for the discussion today. I intended to cover this portion in 15 minutes in deference. It's totally fine. I would rather have done this. But what it means is the rest of you guys are going to have to do a little bit of work on your own. But this is what the guys are saying. These right here are the agreed upon historical facts. The important question to be asked by an historian is the following. What is the likelihood, or how confident are we that this event occurred? And the second most important one is, what's the best explanation of it? So there's a section in the book that talks about common objections. And the point that almost everybody misses when they read books like this is the following. There are objections that will say things like, well, we don't know whether this tomb was empty. We have these data that suggest that one. We know Paul's life was changed based on this, or we think the tomb was empty based on that. The question is, assuming that all of these facts are broadly well attested and accepted, if you got to the point where you're like, yep, okay, historians agree on those facts, which is the first part that they do in the book. The second question is, which of the hypotheses? Remember, the hypotheses that we talked about in the other stuff was that somebody else shot Steve, or somebody hallucinated when they saw Seth do it. which of the data that we have, based on the data that we have, which explanation matches all the facts? That's the question. Which explanation matches all the facts? As an example, the disciples hallucinated. This one doesn't match all the facts. Why doesn't it match all the facts? Because there were multiple disciples and multiple attestation that reported to have seen this. Okay, so hallucination works well in the case of one or two. Occasionally there's mass hallucinations, but if it was a complete mass hallucination, you wouldn't have an empty tomb. If it was a complete mass hallucination, folks who weren't there at the hallucination wouldn't also have hallucinated those things. That kind of thing. So in terms of like the stolen body theory, that would make sense if you didn't also have the other fact, which is facts 2, 3, and 5. So facts 2, 3, and 5, if it was the case that the tomb wasn't found empty, those folks are still saying we saw the risen Jesus. So which explanation explains all the facts well? And what they're saying is if you take an unbiased historical assessment of this one, just based on the agreed upon facts, the best fit hypothesis is that God raised Jesus from the dead. That's the point of the book. Now you can disagree. We got to determine, what we said as priors, what we think is believable, what history can even talk about and can't talk about. That's all good discussion to have. But the purpose of what the book did was this, in a sentence. The book said, given academically accepted facts, what's the best explanation of the competing hypotheses? And that the best explanation of the competing hypotheses from a purely academic perspective is that God raised Jesus from the dead. That's what the authors of the book are saying. Now we're discussing whether or not that's a legitimate means of concluding the truth. But note what the approach is. The approach is not, the Bible said so, therefore it's true. The approach here is, given the way that we reason academically, given the scales that we typically use, if you are non-biased, you should come to the conclusion that Jesus rose from the dead. That's the point the authors are making. Okay, we will give you the floor to open up with the point that I shut you down on here at the end out of lack of time. I appreciate you continuing to do this. And then what I'll say is, let me have a quick indication from class, and this has nothing to do with us. Do we want more of this interaction? Or do we want to go back to, we got one class on the official thing left. Do we want to go back to, discussing just the book and qua book? Okay, so hands on this kind of interaction? Okay, hands on discussing the book? All right, what we'll do is discuss the book portion of it next time to finish that class off. And then if you're willing, come back the next time, and we'll continue this discussion as well. Thank you all very much. We really appreciate it. Thanks for hanging with us on a discussion of probability theory.